0.6 of a second. That is the exact confirmed gap between Lewis Hamilton and his own Ferrari teammate Charles Leclerc in sprint qualifying at Zandvoort, a margin that completely contradicts the expectation that Ferrari's brand new floor and exhaust upgrades would lift both cars equally. Hamilton qualified 7th, 0.624 seconds off George Russell's pole time of 1:11.567, while Leclerc secured third place with a 1:11.622, sitting just 0.55 seconds off the ultimate pace in the exact same specification, SF26. This wasn't a mechanical failure or a reliability issue with the new parts themselves, but rather a setup divergence so severe that it has left the team scrambling to understand why identical hardware produced such radically different outcomes on track. The tension here isn't just about one bad lap. It is about whether Ferrari can diagnose this balance discrepancy before the sprint race begins, because right now, nobody knows exactly what went wrong with Hamilton's car, despite having the same upgrade package that propelled his teammate to the front row. So where does that leave us with the upgrade narrative? We know Ferrari brought their third distinct SF26 update of the 2026 season to this circuit, comprising a fresh floor and new exhaust systems designed to extract more performance under the current regulations. Yet the data tells two completely different stories within the same garage. Leclerc described his effort as his best qualifying lap of the year, extracting maximum value from the new components, while Hamilton was left 0.569 seconds adrift of his teammate in a session he called not good. This disparity creates an immediate analytical problem for anyone trying to assess the true potential of the Zandvoort package. Is the upgrade a success validated by Leclerc's P3? Or is there a fundamental compatibility issue that only manifested on Hamilton's side of the garage? The answer remains elusive because Hamilton explicitly stated that subtle adjustments made between Friday practice and sprint qualifying transformed his car into something unrecognizable. Yet he did not specify which parameters were changed or why those changes had such a catastrophic effect on balance. Big gap, same spec, zero answers. This uncertainty is precisely what makes the situation so dangerous for Ferrari's championship ambitions. When a team introduces a major aerodynamic update, the baseline expectation is correlation, meaning both drivers should see similar gains relative to their previous performance delta. Instead, we have a 0.6 split that suggests either the upgrade has an incredibly narrow operating window that only Leclerc found, or Hamilton's setup direction fundamentally conflicted with the new floor's characteristics in a way that telemetry alone might struggle to explain quickly. Remember, this all happened in the compressed time frame of a sprint weekend, where Parc Fermé conditions lock in specifications after qualifying, leaving almost no room for physical testing or experimentation before the sprint race itself. Hamilton acknowledged this constraint directly, stating they need to go through the data and figure it out, but data analysis takes time that a sprint format simply does not provide. The clock is ticking, the setup sheet is frozen, and Hamilton is starting 7th in a car that felt completely different from the one he drove just hours earlier. George Russell's 1:11.567 pole position lap now serves as the definitive benchmark that exposes just how far off the pace Hamilton currently sits in the 2026 pecking order. That specific timestamp represents a 0.624 second deficit for the Ferrari driver, a margin that translates to roughly 4 car lengths at Zandvoort's average corner entry speeds and places him firmly outside the podium conversation for the sprint. When you compare this directly to Leclerc's 1:11.622, which was only 0.55 seconds shy of Russell's ultimate pace, the math becomes even more punishing for Hamilton's side of the garage. He isn't just losing time to the Mercedes, he is losing more than half a second to the identical SF26 chassis, running the same fresh floor and exhaust components introduced specifically for this Dutch Grand Prix weekend. What makes this delta so difficult to process is the sheer proximity of Leclerc to the front row. A gap of 0.05 of a second to pole suggests the Ferrari upgrade package has genuine top-tier potential, validating Maranello's development direction under the 2026 regulations. Yet Hamilton's result effectively negates that validation in real time, creating a statistical anomaly where the same hardware produces a P3 contender and a P7 starter simultaneously. This isn't a case of one driver making a mistake on their flying lap while the other nails it, because a 6/10 gap between teammates in identical spec cars typically points to something systemic rather than individual error. The setup window for the new floor appears to be razor thin, and Hamilton clearly fell on the wrong side of it during the critical transition from FP1 to sprint qualifying. Setup missed, pace gone, championship hurt. This performance disparity carries weight far beyond a single qualifying session because it disrupts the strategic foundation Ferrari needs to challenge for race wins. If Leclerc can extract P3 pace from the new package, while Hamilton languishes nearly 7/10 behind, the team cannot confidently deploy unified strategies or rely on both cars scoring maximum points. The data shows Hamilton starting the sprint from 7th place, directly behind title rival Russell on pole, and with championship leader Kimi Antonelli sitting 5th on the grid. Every position lost in qualifying is a position that must be fought for in a short-format sprint race where overtaking opportunities at Zandvoort are notoriously limited, especially when starting from the 3rd row against cars with superior straight-line speed. The race's winners and losers analysis confirmed this exact classification, cementing the 0.2624 second gap as an official statistical record rather than a timing screen fluctuation. This number matters because it quantifies the opportunity cost of Hamilton's setup misstep in concrete terms. Had he matched Leclerc's pace, he would have been within striking distance of the front row instead of fighting through midfield traffic. Instead, he faces a recovery drive that demands aggressive tire management and risky overtakes, all while knowing his teammate proved the car had the raw speed to be at the sharp end. The contrast is stark, measurable, and entirely self-inflicted through setup choices rather than component failure, which makes it both more frustrating and potentially more fixable if the team can decode what changed between practice and qualifying. Picture this for a second. You spend months designing a new aerodynamic floor, manufacture it to microscopic tolerances, ship it to Zandvoort, and bolt it onto the car expecting a step forward, only to discover that turning a single adjuster knob in the wrong direction renders all that factory work irrelevant in less than 90 minutes. This is the exact scenario Hamilton described when he explained that subtle adjustments made between Friday practice and spring qualifying transformed his SF26 into a completely different car. Shifting the blame entirely away from Ferrari's 3rd upgrade package of the 2026 season and onto the setup process itself. The fresh floor and new exhaust systems were physically identical on both cars. Yet Hamilton's decision to tweak the balance during the narrow window before Parc Fermé, locked in the specification, created a handling characteristic so alien that he could not extract performance from components that had just delivered Leclerc to within 0.05 of pole. New parts, old problem, setup failed. This distinction matters because it reframes the entire narrative around the Zandvoort upgrade from a potential hardware failure to a calibration error that occurred under extreme time pressure. Hamilton stated verbatim to Crash Net that when they got into qualifying, it was a completely different car, emphasizing that the change happened specifically after FP1 and before the sprint session began. In a standard race weekend, teams have 3 full practice sessions to validate setup changes and revert if necessary, but the compressed sprint format eliminates that safety net entirely. Once qualifying starts, the car is frozen, meaning any adjustment that misses the target becomes a permanent handicap for both the sprint and potentially Sunday's Grand Prix, if the team cannot find a legal workaround within Parc Fermé restrictions. So what exactly changed between those 2 sessions? Here is where the story takes an uncertain twist that complicates the diagnosis. Hamilton deliberately kept the mechanical specifics vague, referring only to subtle adjustments without naming whether he altered ride height, wing angle, differential settings, or suspension geometry. This absence of detail is not an omission in reporting, but rather Hamilton's own chosen language, leaving engineers and analysts to reverse engineer the problem solely through telemetry rather than driver feedback on specific components. What we do know with certainty is that the upgrade package itself showed no signs of malfunction, as Leclerc's P3 result validates the hardware's baseline performance envelope. The variable that broke was purely the setup application, making this a human process failure rather than a manufacturing defect, which is simultaneously better news for long-term development and worse news for immediate recovery. Hamilton acknowledged this reality directly, telling Crash Net they need to figure out what went wrong by going through the data, a statement that confirms the team does not yet have a clear answer despite having access to comprehensive sensor readings. This admission transforms the upcoming hours into a forensic investigation where engineers must correlate Hamilton's subjective feeling of a completely different car against objective measurements to identify which subtle adjustment caused such a disproportionate loss of balance. The fact that he distinguished his struggle from Leclerc's success by noting Charles was in a slightly different place setup reinforces that the root cause lies in configuration choices rather than part quality. Both drivers had the same tools, but only one tuned them correctly for Zandvoort's unique demands, and now Ferrari must decode that tuning gap before the sprint lights go out. Go back to that opening line about the 6/10th gap between teammates, because Hamilton's own explanation for that deficit now centers entirely on the fact that Charles was in a slightly different place to him regarding setup direction. This quote, "delivered to crash," net confirms that Leclerc's baseline configuration was closer to the optimal window from the start, whereas Hamilton had to chase balance through adjustments that ultimately led him astray. The intra-team dynamic here is not one of equal opportunity missed, but rather of divergent development paths where one driver found harmony with the new floor immediately, while the other spent precious track time trying to manufacture it artificially. Hamilton acknowledged this disparity without defensiveness, simply stating, "So that's it," as if accepting that his teammate's starting point was inherently superior for Zandvoort's specific demands. Contrast that resignation with Leclerc's unambiguous confidence when he told Motorsport.com that this was his best qualifying lap of the year. That statement carries enormous weight because it validates the SF26's peak potential under the 2026 regulations at a circuit that historically punishes aerodynamic inefficiency. When your teammate declares personal best performance in the same machinery you just called completely different, the implication is clear. The car works, the upgrade delivers, and the limiting factor was purely operational execution on your side of the garage. Leclerc wasn't surviving the new package, he was thriving in it, extracting a level of grip and balance that Hamilton could only theorize about after his setup changes backfired during the transition from practice to qualifying. Teammate aligned. Driver adrift, data divides. This split in driver experience creates a complex feedback loop for Ferrari's engineering team moving forward. They now have two conflicting datasets from identical hardware, one showing optimal performance parameters from Leclerc's P3 run, and another showing degraded characteristics from Hamilton's P7 effort. The challenge isn't identifying what the car can do, because Leclerc proved that definitively. The challenge is understanding why Hamilton's subtle adjustments moved the car so far away from that proven baseline. His admission that Leclerc was closer to where he needed to be suggests the team may need to converge both cars toward a narrower setup philosophy going forward, reducing the freedom for individual customization that created this vulnerability in the first place. What's really on the line here is whether Ferrari can maintain unified development momentum when their lead drivers are experiencing such fundamentally different relationships with the same upgrade package. If Hamilton cannot trust his instinctive setup preferences because they consistently deviate from the car's true performance envelope, then every future upgrade introduction becomes a high-stakes gamble rather than a calculated step forward. Leclerc's best lap of 2026 proves the ceiling exists, but Hamilton's struggle proves the floor is dangerously low when calibration misses the mark.